Fox News Podcast presents Bret Baier's All-Star Panel.
America's got to be in the lead if you want to deal with these threats. We're going to lead.
The mourning is over. The Shiva is done. And if you're a conservative, you should be optimistic.
You know, my main priority right now is making sure that it delivers for the American people.
We have to make our country great again, and I will do that.
I think the president gets criticized by people all the time for the stuff he says, by people who ignore what he does.
Now, Fox's chief political anchor, Bret Baier.
Senior American and Russian officials spoke for over 4 hours in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday, holding crucial conversations about advancing Ukraine peace talks and strengthening relations between the U.S. and Russia. Following the talks, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters the two countries are working toward three shared goals.
The first next step is working through our respective teams at the diplomatic side, just to ensure that our diplomatic missions can function. There's been a series of reciprocal actions taken over the last 10 years that have really diminished our ability to operate in Moscow, as an example, and they would argue their ability to operate in Washington. We're going to need to have vibrant diplomatic missions that are able to function normally in order to be able to continue these conduits. The second is a high-level team, including those who are experts on these topics, the technical side, to begin to engage with their side on parameters of what an end to this conflict would look like. And on that front, obviously, there's going to be engagement and consultation with Ukraine, with our partners in Europe and others. But ultimately, the Russian side will be indispensable to this effort, and so that process will begin. And then the third is, together with those other two, is beginning to engage in identifying the extraordinary opportunities that exist should this conflict come to a acceptable end, the credible opportunities that exist to partner with the Russians geopolitically, on issues of common interest, and frankly, economically.
Back on Capitol Hill, the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, is facing an array of lawsuits aiming to block DOGE staffers from accessing private data regarding student loans, taxes, Social Security. Despite these objections, many lawmakers, like Texas Senator Ted Cruz, are voicing confidence that the lawsuits will be unsuccessful in bringing down the agency. To discuss this and more, we bring in our panel, host of the Ben Domenech podcast, Ben Domenech, former State Department spokeswoman and Fox News analyst Marie Harf, and Fox News Radio Washington, D.C. correspondent Jared Halpern. Jared, the DOGE attacks are increasing. I think there's more than 70 lawsuits now in different states, in different localities. But it seems like they are plugging forward and moving on towards the Department of Education and eventually the Pentagon.
And most of these lawsuits, Bret, are dealing with kind of where the authority exists for DOGE. Obviously, this Department of Government Efficiency was not allocated by Congress. There is not a congressional authorization here. The president, the White House insist this is an outside agency. They are merely making recommendations. And then the president, in his capacity as a executive branch leader, is, making these decisions, making these cuts, creating these pauses. But it has raised questions about the access that these DOGE employees should have, especially to the more sensitive taxpayer and government employee information. And so you're seeing judges kind of have to work quickly, not so much on the merits yet, but even trying to decide whether or not these lawsuits warrant a pause, a temporary slowdown in what it is that DOGE is trying to do. And so far, we've seen mixed results, right? You've seen some judges kind of totally put these on hold. You've seen others say, well, we're going to kind of narrow the scope here. And others have dismissed these lawsuits writ large. So I imagine this is going to be a storyline we're following for several weeks and months, and potentially setting up some landmark Supreme Court arguments.
Yeah, one would think all the back and forth in different jurisdictions makes for a Supreme Court case someplace. Marie, the politics of this and, the left or center left pushing back on the process of how this is done. But going after waste, fraud, and abuse, as we've talked about many times, has been a goal for the Clinton administration, the Obama administration. Is it tough at all politics-wise to go after this when they are bringing forward these lists of things that they're finding along the way?
Well, Bret, Democrats clearly haven't settled on what their messaging should be. But I think what is most beneficial for them when they're talking to voters is how these cuts and how this action by Elon Musk and his team is influencing real Americans. It's not about numbers. It's not about race, fraud, and abuse. When it starts being harder for Americans to get access to everything from their Social Security to, seeing signs that cancer research is being cut, that, in hospitals across the country that are funding research that cures children of cancer. Like when it starts being clear that these cuts were not done in an organized way, that people who do everything from make sure our nuclear arsenal is safe to make sure that our farmers are getting their subsidies, when those people are not in jobs, Americans start to notice. And so politically, emphasizing that, I think, is really important to do. It's also a problem for many voters, and we've seen this in polls, that they don't want Elon Musk or other people having access to their personal data, that Social Security numbers, IRS data, that people, especially Republicans, used to be deeply uncomfortable with government access to private information. So Democrats are still kind of finding their way here, Bret. My party is trying to figure out the messages that work the best. But when you see farmers in the Midwest unable to get what the government promised them, what Congress passed for them, my question for Republicans and for Donald Trump is, when does that start to impact their decision making? Elon Musk may not care about voters, but Donald Trump and Republicans do, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I could run that a bunch of different ways. I mean, they just got the agriculture secretary through after a major delay on Capitol Hill because of Democrats. And that, Ben, they've made fits and starts. They've hired back people they said didn't mean to let go of on the nuclear front. But when you have lists of 14 million people who are over the age of 130 receiving Social Security, or you have lists of, all of these programs going out the door in foreign countries to the tune of more than $1 billion. That's real money. I know it's not a trillion, but it becomes something that people say, wait a second, why is that happening?
Well, there are two aspects of this that I think are making things very difficult for the Democrats. First off, what Maria is talking about in terms of the impact negatively on the average American is not currently being felt yet. And Democrats are kind of waiting for it to be felt in order to figure out how to attack this. But the truth is that these types of cuts have always been and have consistently polled as very popular, going back for a very long time. It's just that Congress is sclerotic and is incapable of actually making them and doing them and bouncing from continuing resolution to continuing resolution that effectively empowers the bureaucracy to a much greater degree than it would if Congress was doing its job. So you basically have the choice between the chemotherapy that DOGE is offering for the current government, or you have nothing changing, or maybe too much changing all at once. And I think that the bet that the president is making, and that Elon Musk is certainly making, is that changing more rapidly and then fixing problems as they come along the way, massaging things back to the way that they need to be in certain senses, is a better approach than just letting things continue the way that they have been. Thus far, they have been consistently polling pretty well in terms of the reactions that people have across the country. And I think that, to Marie's point, the only juncture where this actually could change around is if you see significant responses among people and communities across the country that start to scare Republicans as it relates to the midterms, and that has senators and the like, complaining far more loudly than they currently are about the changes that are being made. The truth is that there is so much that can be cut without running into the core programs that Americans depend upon, that most Americans depend upon. And that's where Elon has been targeting things the most with DOGE. And it's where I think they'll continue to find, quite a lot that people don't like. But as you said, it's $1 billion here, $1 billion there. It's not the big chunk of spending savings that we actually need in order to do the kinds of things that Donald Trump is committed to do in his second term. And that's going to pose a problem as things go forward. Keep in mind, We just had a hearing last week from the House Ways and Means Committee about the GAO finding that over $130 million, $1 billion, I should say, was wrongly appropriated, or it was fraud, et cetera, waste that went out during the unemployment, just through the unemployment insurance program during COVID. They had to have a hearing about it because they have to extend the length of the time when people can be prosecuted for this degree of fraud, because otherwise it's going to run out in just a couple of months. And that kind of money is when you start talking about real cash, as opposed to the billion here and billion there. And that's something that, of course, is beyond even DOGE's ken.
Panel, we'll hold it right there.
Meantime, Jared, the negotiation seems like it's starting to try to stop the war in Ukraine. Russia meeting with U.S. officials in Saudi Arabia, Ukraine not there, and in fact, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky canceling his trip to Saudi Arabia. Seems like there's a lot of road to go yet on this.
Well, I mean, these seem like at least what's happening in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, are kind of the talks to set up talks. You look at the 4 points that were agreed upon that the State Department set out, establishing a consultation mechanism to address irritants to our bilateral relationship, appointing high-level teams to begin work on a path to ending the conflict, laying the groundwork for future cooperation. These are things that are not even necessarily about the conflict, the war in Ukraine, but it seems as much about trying to maybe reset and improve relations between the United States and Russia, and looking at kind of the readouts and what's been said on the Russian side by the Kremlin. It seems they are way more focused on that aspect than on the ending the war side. Now, obviously, I think the two have to go hand in hand, but I think if you're NATO, if you're these European allies in Ukraine, at least early on, they are raising questions about what's our role here and what is the end game to trying to end this war if all of this attention is kind of paid to Russia and not enough is paid to Ukraine and NATO and these European allies. It does seem, though, they are very early in a process that could take some time to get to a finish line.
Yeah, but Marie, because Russia invaded Ukraine, which they did, it seems like there has to be some pain there, some payment in order to release sanctions or to start a new relationship between the U.S. and Russia. One would think there's going to be some kind of negotiated settlement here.
I think two things are true. You are absolutely right, Bret. Many analysts do not believe that Ukraine can militarily win back every single inch of territory the Russians have taken since 2014. That is just not in the cards. The second thing that's true at the same time, though, is we cannot overestimate how shocked the Europeans are at Vice President Vance's comments at the Munich Security Conference, where he did not come there like Mike Pence did in Donald Trump's first term and talk about the transatlantic alliance, talk about the shared blood that had been spilled on the beaches of Normandy. J.D. Vance went to Germany and met with the leader of the far, far right AfD that is, a little too close to some of Germany's past for many Germans that they have said that, very far to the right, and scolded our European allies. The Europeans knew it would be different, and from everyone I've talked to there, they are in shock. They are in shock at that, and they are in shock that the Americans are negotiating with the Saudis and the Russians about the future of Ukraine, and Ukraine's not at the table, and the Europeans who are the ones who will suffer if Russia is allowed to, quote, win in Ukraine. Everyone is terrified that Vladimir Putin will feel emboldened by Donald Trump, giving him something as part of these negotiations, will push further into Europe, including maybe into NATO alliances. I talked to a friend yesterday who said they could see a scenario in this second term where the U.S. leaves NATO and joins the BRICS countries, which would be such a geopolitical earthquake in terms of our alliances that I don't even know really how to fully comprehend what that would look like. But this is a sea change in the relationship with Europe. Russia and Ukraine are a part of it, but it's much bigger than that. And right now, the Europeans are in a state of shock, I think.
Mm-hmm. I don't think everybody fully appreciates, though, Ben, the weakness of the Russian economy, the power of sanctions on Russia if they are fully enforced. The Biden administration never really fully enforced them. The price of oil and how much that affects Russia, the fact that Saudi Arabia is involved in this and obviously has a stake and kind of a lever in the price of oil. I think there's a lot of three-dimensional chess here that we're not totally appreciating.
Well, Bret, you just sort of said everything that I was going to say. So so I'll focus a little bit more on the other aspects of this. First off, I think you're completely correct, and that the reason that these negotiations are in such an early stage between the United States and Russia is because it really is, as Jared said, I think an agreement to talk about having another talk, and it's very early stages yet. As it relates to what Marie was saying, while I understand the European reaction to this totally, because I think those remarks were as much of a break from the messages that have been sent in the past as we could see, and it is very rare to see a type of public chiding like this that J.D. Vance delivered, criticizing our allies in Europe for abandoning Western values as it relates to free speech and numerous other issues, canceling elections, censoring people, putting them in jail for things like prayer, etc. That type of criticism was something that I believe is very much earned by the Europeans, and that they deserve to hear that type of message, even separate from the conversation about Ukraine. As it relates to NATO, I would remind Marie that our current Secretary of State authored and passed through the United States Senate a law that prevents leaving NATO without actually having an act of Congress. And so if you think that they're going to go back on that, I don't exactly know how or what that kind of path would look like, especially with the makeup of the Senate being the way that it is. But I do think that when it comes to the kind of negotiations that are going to have to proceed going forward, Russia is in a weaker position, I believe, than a lot of people are saying. And the fact is that they need this war to be over. And the fact is that from our perspective, from the president's perspective, I should say, the outcome needs to be one that does not simply lead us back into another war that could take place 2, 3, 4 years down the road. I think that the president knows that. I think that J.D. Vance knows that. And that's why I think the outcome of these negotiations is going to be so critical. And it's why they need to begin. Where they end up, though, I think is a long way away.
Agreed to all of that. Panel, thanks. Now for a bit of history. On February 18th, 1930, the dwarf planet Pluto was discovered. Pluto, once believed to be the 9th planet in our solar system, was discovered by astronomer Clyde W. Tombaugh at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. The existence of Pluto was first proposed by Percival Lowell, who theorized a wobble in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune was due to a 9th unknown planetary body in 1905. By using Lowell's calculations and a new astronomical technique, Clyde W. Tombaugh was able to prove Lowell's hypothesis was correct in 1930. And by March 13th, 1930, the discovery of Pluto was publicly announced. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Marie and Jared and Ben, I'm Bret Baier. We'll see you next time.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.